Hi, good afternoon. My name is Julian Nava. I'm a staff attorney with the National Congress of American Indians, and I will also be your webinar administrator for today. On behalf of the National Congress of American Indians, I'd like to thank you for attending this particular webinar presentation entitled HR 4943, which is the Tribal Tax and Investment Reform Act. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to go over some of our webinar features. Okay, first, you should see on your screen the PowerPoint for today's presentation. If during the presentation you experience any lag in slide transition, it may be the result of internet connections. So just give it a few seconds and it should update on your screen. Currently, with the exception of the panelists, all audience phone lines are muted until the conclusion of the presentation. But if you would like, you can queue up a question at any time during the presentation, and you can use or type in a question using the question box on your webinar control panel. After the presentation, we will have a Q&A session, and panelists will answer questions submitted through the questions box. If you would like to ask your question over the phone, then you can do so by raising your hand and using the raise hand option so that we can unmute your phone line after the presentation. And let me just go through a couple of different options that we have on the webinar. Right here, you can open and close your panel using that particular tab that's highlighted in red or outlined in red. You can close that panel. You can view, select, and test your audio. You can also click that tab that's outlined in red, and that's how you would ask your question. And we would have to unmute your phone line. And then you would submit your text in the questions box, which is outlined.
And thanks, Julian. The only thing I was going to remind people is that audio pin is really important. If you want to ask a question and talk, out loud on the phone, you have to remember to enter that audio pin.
Right. Yeah, make sure you do that. And if you have any issues, just let us know through the question box. And also, our webinar software archives all questions submitted through the questions box. So if we are unable to answer or address your particular questions, we will follow up with you after the webinar has concluded. And finally, this webinar is being recorded so that we can share this particular presentation with you and others who are not able to attend today. And now that I've covered some of the webinar features, I'd like to turn it over now to our moderator, John Dossett.
Hello, everyone. This is John Dossett, General Counsel with NCAI. Thanks so much to Julian for putting this webinar together and for the participants and for all of you who are joining us. It looks like we've got 61 participants now and 62. The numbers are going up. So thanks, everybody. Julian, could you go forward to the next slide? There you go. This bill is legislation to amend the Tribal Tax Status Act and some other provisions in the tax code, and all of it is basically designed to treat tribes the same as state and local governments for certain specific purposes, not for every purpose. It doesn't address every issue and possible thing that tribes might want out of the IRS code, but this is a bill that we've managed to get together working with the great work from Representative Ron Kind and also Lynn Jenkins, the Republican co-sponsor. Both are members of the House Ways and Means Committee, so they're in a great position to get things done. It's got bipartisan support. So I think this bill's got some real momentum now. We just got one other co-sponsor, another member from Wisconsin is his name. I think we'll get to that in a little bit. And so we're really, really excited about this legislation, and we wanted to tell you a little bit more about it so that you can ask your members of Congress to also please support and to co-sponsor the legislation. So if you go to the next slide. There you go. This is the big, I think we've already mentioned this. We really need your, to ask your member of Congress to please co-sponsor the bill, 4943. We've also included sample letters. So if you look over on the right-hand side, you can see some resources. There's Word documents there. There's sample letter for House of Representatives, sample letter for the Senate. You can adapt those to your own purposes, you know, cut and paste, put it on your letterhead, put your address on there, and we'd be really appreciative if you could take a look at those sample letters. If you go to the next slide. I think there's a slight delay here, so I'll talk to keep it going. There it is. I think you can go ahead to the next slide as well. It builds on an existing law. I guess I've already done all this stuff. Let's go on to the next slide. And these are the issues that are covered, and we've got a lineup of speakers who are going to tell us, they're experts on each of these issues. Tax-exempt bonds, pension and health plans. Lee Shannon, who's a friend of mine and also reservation attorney for the Tulalip tribes, is an expert on finance for tribes. Robert Yoder is a tribal attorney, works with many tribes across the country on their benefit programs, and he's going to talk about the pension plans. Judge Abby, I hope Judge Abby has joined us. She's going to talk about the access to child support enforcement. Kayla Gaybeck is going to talk about tribal charities, and then David Simmons is going to talk about the adoption tax credit. David Simmons from NICWA. So we're going to go through each of these very briefly, so you know what this legislation is about, and you're ready to advocate for it. Let's go on to the next slide. And this is, I think, if you're on this webinar, you probably already know this. Tribes are not treated as well as state and local governments under the tax code, and that's what we're trying to fix with this legislation. Let's go on to the next slide. And this is the first, and maybe the most, one of the more significant parts of this legislation is the treatment of tribes for purposes of issuing tax-exempt debt. Right now, tribes are limited under the IRS code to only doing tax-exempt debt when it's under a restrictive essential governmental function test. And this would fix that. And we've invited on the phone Lee Shannon, who I mentioned earlier, and Lee's going to talk to us about why this is so important. Lee, I'll turn it over to you. Why do tribes want to be able to do this?
Thank you, John. As John indicated, my name is Lee Shannon, Office of Reservation Attorney at Tulalip Tribes. As we were speaking, we're in the middle of closing on some financings, both that have taxable and tax-exempt components. And why this is important is currently, let me back up. Why you want to do tax-exempt bonds is that you're going to save money, and you're going to be saving up to perhaps 20 to 30% of your borrowing costs. And when you consider the life of the project over 10, 15, 20 years, that adds up. And if you do that for every possible financing you can through your government or through your Section 17 corporation that are allowed, it can, your tribal dollars go further. Every tribe, no matter how wealthy, have an unmet need, so your tribal dollars go further.
Julian, can you advance to the next slide? When this comes up, it's a chart of historic debt, the rates for borrowing money for over a period of time from 1990 until the big financial crisis in 2008. And it shows the differences between average rates for tax-exempt debt versus taxable debt. And I was wondering, Lee, if you had experience working in some of these periods of time prior to 2008. It looks like there's the bottom line there is tax-exempt debt, that during some periods of time there's really quite a big difference in the interest rates.
Correct. Right now it's a pretty tight differential between the two.
right now as of today, but that fluctuates, and usually it's quite a bit broader between your taxable and tax-exempt rate. And why this is because investors, they're not going to pay income taxes on the interest that they earn. So basically, because of that, they're willing to, pay less interest because they're not going to be taxed on it. So when you get to these situations where you end up, like at the beginning, the difference between 8% and 6%, and then more towards the middle, around 98, and then more towards 2007, there can be some significant differentials in how much savings you have when you finance at that point in time. Whether you fix or float it is something else.
So we put an example together on the next slide, if you could flip to that one, Julian.
So and this one is showing sort of the interest rate cost with this 2% differential. And when you realize that your projects, and this is the important part, right now you're traditionally using your financing, tax-exempt financing for what's called essential governmental functions, which roads, water and sewer, tribal admin buildings, tribal museums, etc. But the states are not restricted in the same way that tribes are. They don't have that essential governmental function restriction. So they can use it for a broader range of tribal economic development. And while we have the tribal economic development bonds, it's not quite the same. They can do things that are called conduit financings that tribes can't do. The issue is tribes are restricted from a wide range of economic activity financing that's available to state and local governments. And this chart is showing you the interest cost savings. When you figure this is over the life of the project, basically your fixed costs or your financing costs are a big part of that. It's a significant savings to the tribe. Like I said, the tribal dollar can stretch that much further. You can do bigger projects. You can do more projects. You can deliver more services to your tribal members. So
are there any questions for Lee about this tax-exempt bond question? I mean, this is, it's the lead issue in the legislation. It's, probably one of the most significant. So I thought if there are any questions about this. Julian, do we have any written questions coming in? If not, we could move on to the next section.
No questions so far.
All right, terrific. Well, thanks very much, Lee. We really appreciate that. And there might be some more questions at the end, so hopefully you can stick around for a minute. Let's go on to the next slide. And this is another very important issue that also relates to the essential government function test being applied to Indian tribes unfairly. And we want to see if we can get this corrected as well. I'll turn it over to Robert Yoder. Thanks so much for being with us, Robert.
Thank you, John. And what I'm going to talk about today is the section of HR 4943 that would correct some pension and benefits issues that have been lingering for quite some time. The bill in its current form would do a bunch of key things that would really help out in putting tribes on equal status with states in this regard. It would add the same distribution rights for tribal and state public safety employees. Currently, we've got, it's very common for public safety employees, firefighters, police, to have early retirement options, but there's a 10% penalty under the code, the Internal Revenue Code, if you get distributions from a tax-qualified pension plan before age 55. So on these types of programs for public safety employees, there's exceptions that allow early distributions without those penalties. So this legislation would put us on equal par with states and allow us to have our firefighters and police with the same incentives that state and local officers receive. It removes the essential government function test and the commercial activity tests that currently limit government status for tribes that don't apply to states. And as Lee had mentioned earlier, that essential government function test that applies to tribes, it applies in the bond area and the pension area, and it's really proved to be problematic in wherever it has been used to limit tribal government status. So it'd be nice to get rid of those artificial tests that don't apply to states. It also confirms that pension plans can honor tribal domestic relations orders. Currently, ERISA only allows plans to honor state domestic relations orders. and it clarifies several issues with regard to tribal deferred compensation plans. In particular, any of you out there that might have an old 457 plan, it would grandfather the status of those plans that has been subject to some uncertainty, and it would put us on equal par with regard to FICA and withholding issues for those types of deferred compensation plans. If we can go to the next slide. And what this slide depicts is really a little bit of history and some of the current issues that we're confronting that this legislation would resolve. Really, in 2006, there was an initial effort to secure equal status for tribes in this area, and it was in the form of what we call the Pension Protection Act, or the PPA. And that was really an effort by tribes to get equal status under this area and ERISA. But unfortunately, that legislation ended up including a commercial activity test and this essential government function test that applies to tribal plans and doesn't apply to states. So while it was an effort in the right direction, it ended up falling a little short because we've got these limitations that were included with the PPA. For the past 10 years, there haven't been any regulations issued with regard to what really is a commercial function or an essential government function under these rules. There have been several consultation efforts and comments submitted to Treasury and IRS. But the truth of the matter is it's really a difficult question sometimes to answer. What is an essential government function, which if you look around your state and local governments as well as tribes, you see it's sort of a moving target. We do different things today on the government side than we did 10, 15, 20 years ago. For the past 10 years, we've really been in a sort of a holding pattern. There's been, IRS has granted transitional relief, and we've had the ability to or they've recognized the tribes can interpret these terms under a good faith, reasonable good faith interpretation until we can work guidance out. However, recently, the Department of Labor has sort of stepped up its enforcement efforts in this area, particularly in the context of Form 5500s and penalty assessments. And so it's an issue that's sort of coming to more of a crisis mode as to how these terms are defined and how tribes can comply with these rules unless the law is changed. One tribe recently asked for consultation from Department of Labor on these issues and to develop guidance and regulations so that they can file 5500s on, on a reasonable basis. And the response that we received was that from DOL was that agencies are generally free to develop interpretations of a statute that they administer through a case-by-case adjudications. They indicated that consultation with tribes regarding these matters is also unnecessary, since in their view the meaning of the PPA is already clear. That response to a consultation effort is very unlike the responses we received from Treasury and IRS previously when we were discussing essential government functions and commercial activities. It's a disturbing response, and we hope that over the course of this next year we can improve that and get some real consultations so that we can work out reasonable rules for tribes to follow. This legislation would solve the problem by simply eliminating those terms that have proven very difficult to define over the past 10 years. And if we can move on to the final slide on this issue. And just to give you all a flavor, and many of you, listening in have probably dealt with some of these issues, but the way the PPA drew this difference between commercial and government employees, all employed by the same tribe, it's proven to really be problematic in administering pension plans and health plans in practice. It also is seen as a violation of sovereignty, particularly when you look at the fact that our pension plans must honor state domestic relations laws, but we're not permitted currently to honor tribal domestic relations orders. Some of the areas that have really given us some practical problems are in the areas of where we've got shared employees. Perhaps tribes have individuals who work for a casino during the week and maybe the Park and Rec department or fire department on the weekends. And when you've got shared responsibilities or employees transferring between different tribal entities, or you could even have individuals whose duties may change over time. How do we address that? And if someone's duties change, how do we comply with a law that says we have to basically keep our commercial and government employees separate as far as compliance goes? An example here, what about the police officer who does guard duty at the casino on weekends or as part of his regular role? What about the timber employee at a revenue-generating timber company that may also have duties over managing environmental or conservation issues for the tribe? These are all issues I think that have proved to be very difficult to deal with from a practical standpoint, and would really support the idea of eliminating these distinctions so that we can simplify our plans. As it currently stands under the current law, tribes that want to preserve their government status are really forced to administer two separate plans. Obviously this is much higher in cost, and for health plans in particular, if we have to have multiple plans, that means smaller plans. And any of you out there who may work on health plan issues, you know that there's power in numbers. We get much better deals and we can spread risk much better when we've got more bodies in the plan. So to the extent that tribes are forced to separate plans and have smaller programs, it really puts us at a disadvantage in our ability to manage those costs for our employees. Bottom line is that the governmental plan structure that applies to states, we think, provides sufficient oversight and protection. It works well for states, it works well for cities and other local governments. We think it would work fine for tribes as well. In fact, the PPA allows us to have large plans that are under those rules. So we view it as really no real need to subject tribes to two separate sets of rules at the same time. It's the best option for tribal employees. Tribes get the benefit of larger plans, lower costs, and this legislation would simply put us back on equal footing with tribes, cities, local governments, county governments, and simplify the process so that we're only having to comply with one set of rules at the same time, just like other governments.
Thanks so much, Robert. That was terrific. I was looking to see if there are any questions. I don't see any. I think you and Lee are both so experts on these topics, and you explained it so clearly that we don't have any questions so far, but we may have a few questions at the end. So let's move on to the next topic. If you could change the slide there, Julian, we'd appreciate it. And I think this one is the tribal foundations and charities. And Kayla, are you on the line?
I am. Thank you, John. Again, my name is Kayla Gabek. I'm a public affairs advisor in Holland and Knight. This section is pretty straightforward. It provides on par with state 501c3s as public charities. Under current law, a tribe is able to form a 501c as a private foundation, but not a public charity. And it's also able to receive charitable contributions from outside sources if it dedicates the funds for public purposes. Public purposes meaning to benefit the tribal members, such as scholarships for college or other efforts. And the tribe doesn't have to be a 501c3 to receive funds for public purposes just mentioned. So generally speaking, when forming a 501c3, it either qualifies as a public charity or a private foundation. As I mentioned just a moment ago, tribes are only eligible to form 501c3s as private foundations. The problem with this designation is that private foundations have restrictive regulations that often trap tribally owned or fully funded charities and results in doubled compliance costs annually. And so for this reason, tribes have been advised not to form private foundations. There are, however, special rules for states that establish 501c3s as public charities, and this qualification has multiple benefits, including allowing charities to be funded by state grants, or in this case, when we're talking about PARITY, tribal grants. And because of less restrictive regulations, there are increased opportunities to receive additional outside funding for its efforts, which for most tribal charities would be extremely beneficial in promoting its efforts. But because of current simple oversight under current law, tribes are excluded from receiving the same benefits as a public charity in a similar manner as states. So Section 5 of HR 4943 would fix this inconsistency. So this provision has been scored in the past as no cost or not losing revenue. And there have been bills in the past which have been passed the House and separately the Senate. But there's never been a bill with this provision that's passed both chambers, making the inclusion and passage of this bill really important. So that's all I've got, John. I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks so much, Kayla. Terrific. This is exactly what I was hoping. These tax issues get complicated, and I'm really glad you're helping out with this. I don't see any questions for now, so let's move on to the next slide if we can.
John, there is a question regarding tax-exempt financing. Do you want to hold off until the end for that one?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead? There's two more issues, and I think they'll be fairly quick. And then we'll just open it up for questions on any of the topics. Well, maybe that'll be a good way to go.
Okay, great.
Has Judge Abby joined us?
Yes, I hope so.
Oh, thank you very much, Judge Abby. I'm glad we were trying to get you connected, so I'm glad you're able to join. You know, we were talking to you about this issue, and it was very nice to meet you the other day. Judge Abby is I think the chief judge for the Yurok tribe, and when we told her about this provision, you were quite interested and supportive of it. So I thought, because you seem to know about this area quite a bit, I thought you might be able to help explain it to folks, how this provision would work and how it would help tribes.
Okay, it's much like the last provision that we were all discussing. It really is a fixed bill in the sense that these are rights that the states, counties have, and when they set up the tribal child support enforcement programs, it was an oversight, and they did not allow for us to have certain abilities that are really necessary and essential for us to function as child support courts. So this isn't anything special in the sense of, okay, we're going to do something special for the tribes. It's really, oh, wait a second, we need to have the same abilities as our state does, as the counties do. In particular, we need access to the locator database. And what that means is that when you're trying to work on child support cases, as long as everybody's right in front of you, it's fine. But oftentimes you have one parent or sometimes both parents not available or close on the reservation. And this locator database is really essential because it allows you to put in requests, and they have access to a lot of federal data, and they can pinpoint for you the location of your tribal members. So that's something that we really need. The second section deals with, okay, we have orders now, and we have enforcement that the party who owes is not making their payments. Well, this allows you, just like the states can do, to get an offset or to take some of the tax refunds. But in order to do that, you need to have this special authority to do it. When our courts were set up and our child support programs were set up, they neglected to do that because it requires a designation. It isn't just automatically assumed in both of these cases. So that's pretty much what it's about. It's about, oh, whoops, we forgot, we're sorry, let's try to fix this. Because we want you to be effective, because if you're not effective, that's going to impact not only the clients that we're trying to serve, that the entire program then becomes less effective. So that's, in a nutshell, what it's about.
Thank you so much, Judge Abby. We really appreciate it, and your knowledge about these issues, and terrific. Hopefully you'll be able to hang out with us for a little bit longer, and we'll take some questions at the end. There's one last issue in this legislation, and I think Julian's moving on to the next slide. And this one is about the adoption tax credit. And I believe David Simmons from the National Indian Child Welfare Association is on the phone. David, maybe you could explain this issue to the participants in our webinar. Are you on, David? Well, maybe David isn't on the phone. I thought he was. He said he was logging in. David, if you're out there, hopefully you can join us. If not, I'll try to explain this, and maybe Judge Abby, you can help with it. My understanding of this issue is that state court judges, the adoption tax credit is available for parents who adopt children with special needs. And of course, you know, these are the parents who have the biggest hearts in the world, right? They're the ones who, the children with great needs, they need to be adopted by somebody, and they do it, and the tax code gives them an adoption tax credit. However, only state courts can make the finding that it's a special needs child. Tribal courts aren't able to do this. It's another oversight in the law. So this would fix that oversight and would enable a tribal court or a tribal court judge to make a finding of a special need and make those parents eligible for the adoption tax credit. Do you have anything to add on that, Judge Appy?
No, I mean, I think that's exactly it. It's another fix. It's a situation that was an oversight. I don't think anybody did it intentionally, and it really is to encourage adoption. And also, it is a benefit because there's an expectation that this adoption is going to be a more costly situation for the adopting parent. And so it's really trying to say, okay, look, we're able to give you this limited additional assistance. And I think people, for the most part, also want us to have it. It was just something that, you know, in the sort of hustle and bustle of life when people are putting together legislation, and there's not great communication sometimes between the actual people on the ground and the people who are doing policy, and this is an example of that, I guess.
John, can you hear me? Hello?
Oh, there's David. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, David.
Oh, great. Yeah, they muted me so I can talk now. So I did have a couple other things. You guys did a great job of sharing the basics about it's really important, because one of the things that we know that tribes do, and I know Judge Avenatti, you certainly at UROC you do this, is tribes don't always use that sort of Western mainstream form of adoption. They use customary adoption sometimes. And so these are going to be much more attractive to many tribal members who want to adopt and need some additional assistance, because often when you're adopting children who have special needs, you know, you need not just legal assistance and some of those kinds of subsidies, but you also need other kinds of resources too. And the tax credit can actually help offset some of those expenses, as well as other programs that the state might have as well. The other thing I'd mention is that this bill has been in the Congress now as a standalone for the last 2.5 years, and it's got pretty broad bipartisan support. And we have expressed on the record support from over 17 adoption and other child family kind of organizations, non-Indian organizations that is. Plus we have a NCAI resolution from 2015 that also supports this, as well as many of these other tax priorities too. So I just wanted to mention that as a couple of other pieces of information that might help people as they're trying to help influence the passage of the legislation.
All right, thanks so much, David. All right, Julian, maybe if you'll go on to the next slide, we'll head into the home stretch here for our webinar. The big thing is, you know, this legislation is introduced. It's got a bill number. It has Republican and Democratic co-sponsors who are members of the Ways and Means Committee. So that's terrific. So on the House side, we're looking for more co-sponsors. So please ask your member of the House of Representatives to please co-sponsor HR 4943. It's a very simple and direct request. And we've attached, if you look over on your right, you can see a documents there. There's some sample letters. We also included a copy of a Department of Treasury report on the tax-exempt bond financing. Basically, that was required by the Recovery Act in 2009. No, yeah, it was 2009. And the Department of Treasury did a report that fully supports the tax-exempt bond financing fix. We also included a copy of the bill over there. And then for the Senate side, the bill has not yet been introduced on the Senate side, so we're looking for original sponsors and co-sponsors on the Senate side as well. Ideally, they would be members of the Finance Committee. So if your senators are, for example, Senator Cantwell from Washington State, if your senators are members of the Finance Committee, that would be terrific. Let's see. After that, I mean, those are the next steps. I suppose we should go to questions now. Julian, maybe you could read out any written questions you've received, and we can try to answer them.
Yes, and we have 4 questions. The first question is from Corrine Wilson, and it's regarding tax-exempt financing. And her question is, would SEC regulations also need to be amended to issue tax-exempt debt in the public as state and local governments do?
Oh, Lee Shannon is the guy to answer this question because he had the same point. Are you still with us, Lee?
I am, and yeah, great catch, great zeroing in on the detail. In the background to this, well, the short answer is it's not necessary, but it would be preferred. In the background to this is when they passed the Indian Tribal Governmental Tax Status Act, through some oversight, they did not amend the corresponding provision that exempts state and local governments from registering their debt under securities laws. As a result, there's no exemption from registration of tribal debt, so you have to basically go into contortions to get around that. You privately place your debt, which is contra to why you would do a bond deal, because you want a broader number of people buying your bonds, so the price goes down. Or you back it by a letter of credit, which gives you your own exemption. And a letter of credit can help because you'll get the credit rating of the letter of credit, and you might get better pricing as a result to offset the cost of letter of credit. But this is exactly the point. We have more restrictions in Indian country and more costs to borrowing money. And so I agree with you. The SEC, the laws regarding registering tribal debt need to be amended as well. It's something we should look at in the near future as part of cleaning it up and sort of doing away with the differences between tribal borrowing and state and local government borrowing. Great question.
Yeah, we were discussing this just before the call, so you caught that on very quickly. Thank you. What other questions do you have, Julian?
Okay, this is from Scott McDonald, and I think I can answer this one. And the question is, how many co-sponsors total? And as of now, we have 3 sponsors. Representative Ron Kine from Wisconsin, who introduced the bill, Lynn Jenkins from Kansas as a co-sponsor, as well as Mark Pocan from Wisconsin.
Thanks, Julian. So the Kansas tribes and the Wisconsin tribes are getting it done. But I think it's, I don't think that they will be, tribes right now, the members of Congress are back home in their districts. A lot of tribes are meeting with them. This is a great time to bring it up with your members. Ask them to please co-sponsor this bill. And then when they get back in September, they can add their names as co-sponsors, and this legislation will build more and more momentum the more co-sponsors we add. Okay, any other questions?
The next question from Jody Gillette, are these slides available for all the participants?
Yes, we usually, maybe afterwards, Julian can email it to all the participants, or he can put it up as we put it up as a resource. And then the other thing that's usually available is the entire webinar itself is recorded, and you can replay it if there's special tax points you want to hear again.
Okay, next question is from Bill Payne. Haven't tribal support programs already been allowed access to the federal parent locator system under legislation that was passed about 2 years ago?
I'm not familiar with that. Judge Abbey, obviously we wouldn't be pushing this legislation if we thought it were already fixed. This bill was introduced 2 years ago. Ron Kind, this bill it's been around in slightly different forms for a couple of years now, but it was only introduced by Ron Kind, and it didn't have bipartisan support. Now that we've got bipartisan support for this bill, I think it's much more likely to go forward. And but I am not aware that this was corrected in different legislation.
And the next question from Bill Payne again, and it's basically asking how can we save the sample letters as well as the bill itself. And like John said, I can email that to all of you all so that you can have that information.
I think you can also just, if you go to the window, you can just click on it, on the letter, and then it'll download right onto your computer. I just did it, and you just click on the document, it downloads, and then, so you can get it straight from the webinar that we're doing now, and we'll also send it to everyone as a follow-up.
Absolutely. Okay, and our last question is from Hayes Gary, and that question is, what is the resistance from Congress to end the unfair tax issues with tribal governments when the Constitution clearly states so?
There's no resistance, it's just not resistance.
Well, thank you very much, Gary Hayes, a guy we all know at NCAI. Thanks for joining the call, or the webinar. The resistance generally on tax issues is the cost. Every tax bill is scored and has a number attached to it as far as how it affects the budget and the debt, and that's the area that we usually need to push on. So one of the next things for this bill is to get it scored. It's not. I tend to agree with you. There's not so much resistance to the idea of treating tribes equally. It's just the amount of money. Almost every provision in this bill doesn't really have much of a cost. The one that probably will have some cost to it is the tax-exempt bonds provision, because that one, there will be a number attached to it. However, it'll be relatively small right now because, as Lee mentioned earlier, the difference currently between taxable debt and tax-exempt debt is fairly narrow. So the scoring is likely to be favorable, and that's one of the reasons we want to push this bill right now. Now's the time to get it done. Any other comments on sort of Kayla, what are your thoughts about maybe getting this bill through Congress?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I think we really have a good chance with this bill. There's a major theme in this one of just generally parity across the board. So even if we don't get our ideal tax reform after we get our new president, I think this is something that still has traction, and it's really important. Like I mentioned with, the public charity, some of these provisions have received attention and they have been successful in the past. And given that track record, we just really need to all work together and really move this forward. When we were out in Spokane at NCAI, we talked briefly just kind of, what does the timeline for tax reform look like for us? And they're working on doing the building blocks and building the foundation for that now. So when we do get our new president looking into the beginning of that term, we might see movement before then, but regardless, we need to start building that foundation. So it's really important that you're reaching out to your members of Congress, reaching out to members on the Senate Finance Committee and others that are strong in that front to get a Senate bill or Senate version of the bill and really get this going. Now's the time.
Terrific, thank you. Are there any other questions, Julian? If anybody has any further questions about this, please reach out to either Julian or I, or I think anybody on the call would be happy to answer any questions that may occur to you down the road. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to try to unmute this particular caller.
Great.
Okay, it seems like it's unmuted, so go ahead with your question from the native village of Kludika.
Oh, hello. I wasn't able to get on the phone call until halfway through, but I was on the webinar from the beginning, but your audio was not with it unless you got on the phone call. So I was just wanting to I think you answered the question that it's going to be recorded and I'll be able to have access to the audio and the slides again?
Yes, it'll be recorded, and we sometimes, I think we put them on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, but we also, I think Julian will send out an email to all the participants that'll tell you how to get access to the recorded webinar, and you can watch it again and listen. Yeah, and the slides as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, you're from Alaska, and your member of Congress is Don Young. He's a very well-respected, longtime member of Congress, and getting Don Young to support this bill would be terrific.
Okay.
But the same is true for virtually, you know, any member of the House of Representatives. If we can get them on as co-sponsors, that would be great. Okay.
So we just need to send letters out as soon as possible.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you know, members are back in their, I mean, now's the time of year when they're often doing events. You know, there's an election coming up. They're doing events. They're listening to their constituents. Now's a good time to talk to them.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thanks. Any other questions, Julian?
That's everything.
All right, that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for being on the call today. We got it done in 49 minutes. Really appreciate this, all your work on the legislation, and please be in touch with us if there's anything we can help with. Have a great day.